Welcome to Voices Carry, a podcast series hosted by Jim Gibutowski, CEO of Marketing Messages, a global voiceover services firm, and his wife, Janet Krause, a Boston-based startup CEO and former professor of entrepreneurship at Harvard Business School. Jim and Janet interrupt their life of marital bliss to discuss how professional voiceover plays a critical role in creating a brand-affirming customer experience for businesses, from pizza shops and auto dealers to multinational corporations with global call center systems featuring languages spoken around the world.
Hey everyone, we're back to talk more about the mysterious black art that's voiceover for call center applications. So, before we start, Janet, I've actually spruced up the studio a bit. So what do you think?
I've got to say, it looks pretty good. And I'm not going to lie, it was a little bit of a mess before the last episode, but I think you're kind of getting it all organized as you take on this new adventure.
Right. You know, it's funny. We're doing a podcast here, but this next new adventure is actually podcasting. So for all of you Marketing Messages listeners out there, we're now offering podcast services in addition to our regular voiceovers. And that's everything from helping you come up with a concept to producing the audio and distributing it over the internet. So stay tuned for that.
Jim, it's really exciting. And I know it's going to be a super great way for your customers to build audience and to support their brands.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's going to be great. So last time we had one of our voice talents on, Liz. Wasn't she great?
Yeah, she was smart and she was a lot of fun. I learned a lot from her.
Yeah, and I think you're going to learn a lot from our next guest too. You know, there's no doubt that voice talents form the heart of our services, but a really great call center experience calls for a strong user interface design.
That term, user interface design, feels kind of technical to me, the layperson, but I guess what it really means is what I want. It's when I call a company, I want to get the information I need, and I want to be made to feel like the company, cares about me and knows me. So I think that's what we're getting at, right?
Yeah, I don't blame you. I feel the same way when I'm on the phone, in my everyday life.
Yeah, I think it's like having a real conversation in the world with a bank teller or an airline reservation agent. You kind of want to be, spoken to like they'd speak to you if you were standing there face to face. You're going to get the information. It's not going to take too much time, but you feel you got what you needed. That's what I would want with a user interface design.
Yeah, exactly. I feel the same way. It's really not good enough to just get the caller through a transaction, right? You really have to meet a specific business objective and, probably more importantly, provide a great customer experience that reflects positively on your brand. So what we're going to go over in this episode are really three things. First of all, how to design for a great caller experience. Then we're going to move from there to trends in voice user design and specific techniques that are used by voice user interface designers. And then what we'll do is end up with how the voice talent plays an important role in all this.
Sounds great. Shall we welcome Leslie?
We shall. Let's do that. So I'd like to welcome Leslie Walker of Concentrix to Voices Carry. Happy you could make it, Leslie.
Thanks so much for inviting me here, you guys. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be great.
So let's just start a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about your background.
I arrived at voice user interface design. It's a lot. So typically what we in the biz call it is VUI design. So I arrived at VUI design, or even just UI design, if you don't want to speak specifically about the voice channel. But I arrived at UI design kind of in a different way than most UI designers do. I think for now, the younger crowd, there is human-machine interface classes that you can take in undergrad school. So UI design is something that you can get in a second year class as part of a larger computer science degree these days. But back in the day, when I was going to school, I didn't know what speech recognition was. I didn't know it was a thing. And so I decided that psychology and French were both really interesting to me. And so because it was interesting, I took classes and graduated thinking I'm going to go and get my PhD in counseling psych. Did all but my thesis. And in the meantime, to put myself through my master's program, I got a job working for a speech recognition company. and was doing data processing. I mean, literally, I was taking WAV files and segmenting them into little pieces to say, this is this phoneme, this is this phoneme, this is this phoneme. Just kind of ended up thinking, I kind of like this. This kind of dips into my psychology and French interest. And you know what? I'm making money now. And having money in hand was I'd been a starving student for years, and I was kind of digging having a little money in my pocket, and was thinking about, do I really want to go through a doctoral program? And do I really want to do all of the licensing requirements? You know, you have to really give away a lot of your time for a long time. And so I thought, I think I'm going to stick with the speech record stuff and kind of see where it takes me. Yeah, I've kind of done everything except code. I've done some project management. I've done, obviously, design work for a long time. And really, the design piece is where I've landed and where I've stuck for a good long time, because it is really interesting. Like I said, it gets at that language interest, and it gets at that psychology interest, because every day I have to put myself in the mindset of, okay, I have placed an order for the perfect turkey platter for Thanksgiving, and I was told it was arriving today. I just got an email that says it's not arriving until November 30th. Well, that's a problem. So now I've got to put myself in the mindset of, how's that caller feeling? And what is that caller likely going to do when they contact a retailer to get assistance for what for them is a very real problem?
That's happening a lot these days.
It is happening so much these days, yeah.
That is just so interesting to me, Leslie, though. It really is. If you think about it, psychology and language, that's literally what you're doing all day long.
It is.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit just quickly about Concentrix and what your role is specifically.
Sure. Okay, so I have responsibility for the design and QA resource groups in our professional services team. So we're responsible for supporting the creation of voice and chatbots for custom applications for our clients, who most of them are providing support for their end users in a contact center scenario. So most of the work we do is for and with contact centers. And so we have things that we've got to support them with, like the KPIs, key performance indicators that they care about are things like keeping agents busy, keeping conversations short, making sure agents can answer the phone quickly or get on that chat channel quickly. All those kinds of KPIs that you're thinking about, I'm thinking about, because I've got to support the contact center and the contact center's end users.
And as I understand it, you have a team, and the team has a number of VUI designers or user interface designers. Maybe you can talk about what they do specifically in this process, and then we'll kind of move through the front end of the process a little bit.
Sure. Okay, so typically what happens is we are notified by sales that, hey, we've been working with a client, we've gathered some upfront requirements enough to determine how much money they need to spend with us in order to get their needs met, and go get them, Tiger. So at that point, we typically try to do some sort of sales handoff, so we understand what do we really promised to this client, and what is it they're hoping to accomplish in working with us. Because if you don't understand what the client's pain points are and what the goals are that they're trying to accomplish and what their end users' pain points are, you're going to end up off the mark. So you got to first start out with, what are we hoping to accomplish here? We meet and greet. We establish sort of, hey, Mr. Client, here's what our process typically is. And so we have a conversation with them similar to what we're having right now. And we just do a little orientation. But once we get really started with how are we going to create this application for you that's going to provide some self-service, we gather some requirements. We build a design in our proprietary design tool. We create some project artifacts that tell the client and development what it is that what needs to be built. What are the specifics around how that end user and the application are going to be able to talk to each other, what the application is going to be able to understand and what it's going to tell the end user. And then once it's developed, we do some QA on it. We want to make sure that we're turning out quality product. And then we turn it over for UAT, user acceptance testing, where the client gets to take a whack at it and see if it's really serving in the way that they thought it would. We deploy, and then we start testing how real users are interacting with our applications. Because often what happens is that art and science that we talked about, a lot of it, you're doing your very best informed guesswork, and end users always surprise you.
Yeah, right? You're sure they're going to say after that question and that response that their next reaction is going to be this, and you go, oh, you went that way. Like, didn't expect that at all, right?
That's right.
And what they're looking for in terms of the next piece of information, you didn't see that coming then at all. You're thinking that's going to be like question 3 that they get to, and you find out, oh no, that's like right up front.
Right. Exactly.
So I have a question, because you talked about the KPIs, and you gave some examples of time on the phone and time to pick up the next call. Where does the art piece come in? How do you get a sense of the branding or the empathy or the conversation or whatever that is? Where does that fit into that upfront process?
So there's easy things like word choice. I mean, every word that gets employed has a connotation. So the connotation that in your word choice is so crucially important. But another thing that's really important that doesn't get talked about enough, in my view, is the word choice needs to be super simple. If you have a 2-syllable word that can convey the same idea as a 3-syllable word, go with a 2-syllable word. Because every syllable you stick into your experience, when we're talking about a voice experience, it's not as big of an issue with chat, but everything that you can do to make your conversation with the caller shorter and easier for them to wrap their brain around is better. Simple is better. We've talked about how I love language, I love words. And the biggest challenge I always have for myself, and that I have with other designers, not necessarily on my team, but I've seen with designers in the business, is we're a bunch of smarty pants. And we like to show off the smart words that we know. But the problem is it gets in the way a lot of times of understandability. And so we really have to think about, we sometimes have people who are calling that maybe are hard of hearing, or maybe we have some that aren't very strong readers. Sometimes maybe we have callers who are young. And so we really want to try to democratize the word choice and ensure that it's straightforward and easy to comprehend.
Oh my gosh, that is so interesting to me, because one of the things now that you say it, I recognize in myself is that I sometimes space out. And so if I come back to what the voice recording just said to me, if there were too many words, I don't remember which one was the important one. Whereas if it was short, I'm like, oh, they said service, right? Like if there's words wrapped around it, it's much harder for the confused brain to remember it all, or the brain that's filled with information. So that's
right.
Clear now that you say it.
Yeah. Some other techniques that we have too, though, Janet, just to, kind of engage callers and make sure that we're crafting a good experience. So we talked about simple word choice. We talked about connotation, but also, the voice talent that you use and the warmth and professionalism. So you want professional, but you also want warm, engaged, and accessible. Mm-hmm. Like in most situations, you want them to kind of ooze that approachability. Like you want them kind of reaching out through the phone and patting that caller on the back of the hand in some sort of verbal way. So you really got to make sure that persona that you create, approachability is a really important piece of that.
That feels a little bit like a newer trend. Is that true? Like I have felt over the last several years that when you listen to people, that feels much more familiar, much more, yes, the professional, but the accessibility, or like, I might know that person, as opposed to what we might have heard 10 years ago, which was a lot more staccato and professional and
VUI designers have been fighting that fight for at least 2 decades, but it really seems like it's only in the last decade that clients are really believing us that you can have a professional IVR that doesn't sound like it's got a robot who's narrating War and Peace.
Right.
You know what I mean?
We get some feedback sometimes from voice talents where we ask them to give us a more informal read. And they'll come back and say, well, you just gave me this script that has all these formal words in it, right?
Yes.
I think we're doing a better job now of setting up the voice talent for success, and in turn, setting up the whole caller experience to be successful. And,
we really want to emulate the experience between, if you're calling a retail banking application, you want that experience to feel like I'm in my bank talking to my friendly local teller who's going to help me with personal attention and make me feel like I'm part of this banking community. You want to try to create that kind of experience irrespective of the vertical that you're designing for. That's what you're trying to emulate. Like, what is it if you have an agent who's taking that call? How does the agent handle that call? That's the golden chalice.
Got it.
Yeah, that feels right. So Leslie, I know we've been talking about sort of making the dialogue sound like you're in a real conversation with the brand, like you're actually part of the community. But Jim also tells me that there's something new technologically that's possible with conversational technology or something like that. Can you elaborate?
Sure. Conversational technology is really pretty cool, and it's something that VUI designers have been kind of hoping and wishing for, the last couple of decades, at least, that I've been doing it. We've always wanted to be able to do things like ask the caller, how can I help you? And have the caller be able to say, I would like to be able to make a payment today with my checking account ending in 1234. Conversational allows us to do that. That's been very historically difficult for us to be able to do because it requires a really complicated technology that's heavy on computing power. And it's really only in the last 5 years that this has become commercially viable. And so we are now able to do things like, how can I help you today? Which is great because if you have a contact center that is supporting 20, 50, 100, 150, 200 different kinds of contact reasons, and if the caller expresses those in different ways, depending on what kind of customer they are, or depending on what country they're calling from. Maybe you have paying your bill is called one thing in the United States, but it's called something else in Canada. I'm making stuff up. Same language, but there's some localization impacts of how customers express themselves around that need. And so now conversational allows us to allow the end user to put things in his or her own words. They're now driving the experience. They get to be in control. And so it does some cool things for us, like used to be when we had large menu driven, press 1 for this or 2 for that. Well, we don't have to do that anymore. So it takes this very complicated menu structure and collapses it.
It's just a web.
Just tell me the name of the movie that you want to, that you want to go see.
But I would imagine, here's the thing, I would imagine, having done a number of these in, 5, 10, 15 languages, how does this become more challenging when you're dealing with more than one language?
It's extremely challenging because it used to be that you'd create a design with your little menu structure and you'd go off and you'd record the English prompts. And then you would just have the Spanish talent record the translated versions of those prompts. Can't do that anymore. It doesn't work like that because the natural language component of the conversational technology has to be built from scratch. They're basically two completely separate applications. So it's double the work.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
That's really amazing.
That's
a left, and that's funny because back to your training as someone who studied French, I know Portuguese and French, and I'm thinking about them in real time right now, like, they'd be completely different, like really, truly completely different.
That's right.
Yeah, and
because
I would
of the way questions get asked or sentences are formed.
Right. And I would imagine, thinking about this from a project management standpoint and delivery standpoint, that this is going to elongate the process. And I know, Leslie, we talked a little bit before about this around, different project management styles. I think we mentioned Agile. So that's something that maybe we can talk a little bit about.
So Agile's been a change in development process that's happening across the world. This doesn't just impact my business and my industry, it's impacting everyone everywhere who's doing any kind of application work. Primarily the idea around Agile is instead of waiting 6 months for us to gather requirements, design it, QA it, UAT it, and deploy it before we start realizing any savings, any ROI from the deal. Let's put out a minimal viable product, an MVP, and get it out there and start getting some savings from it. It doesn't have to do everything that all callers call about. Let's just have it do a couple things that callers call about. And then now we're going to start realizing some benefits in the contact center. We'll start getting some savings, and those savings can start funding subsequent changes. And we're going to start doing a release every 2 weeks. So we're introducing incremental improvement regularly. So this is very appealing to a lot of our clients who are quite keen on seeing some business benefits in short term.
Okay, well, and I can also imagine that the Agile approach with the conversational technology is a nice pairing, because it means you don't have to figure it all out. You have to figure the beginning out, and then you find out what the reaction to that is, and then you figure out what the next tree or triage or place to go. Because you can imagine conversational all mapped out on day one, you'd never get there. You'd be like going in circles over and over again. Like,
you
never get there. I could go there. I could go there.
That's very, very true, Jen.
Yeah.
So what we find is we deploy with an MVP, and then language is creative. Users say all kinds of things.
And then you find out where to go from there.
That's right. And even if you've got a really mature voice or voice bot or chat bot, we still are like always monitoring performance, because people just do unusual things that no one had planned for.
But you can say like, oh, but the thing that most people said was this, so let's build that next. And then the most things they said after that was this, so let's build that next.
That's absolutely right. It allows you to prioritize.
Yeah, right. So yeah, I see how the conversational technology and the Agile process really sort of work together and allow you to kind of test, iterate, and deploy. What other specific techniques are you finding that VUI designers are using these days? What else is going on in the design process?
Post-deployment is where I find that we're spending a lot of our time these days that we didn't used to. Back in the day, when you were doing old DTMF, dual tone modular frequency, the touch tone.
That's right.
Back in those days, you basically deployed an IVR and you kind of walked away from it, right? These days, what I find is, because we're doing that MVP and we're deploying and the natural language is growing, and what's happening is, of course, what we sort of suspected and thought was probably happening but didn't look at very much was businesses grow and change, right? And businesses and users needs grow and change. So what happens is, as soon as you deploy a design, it starts to drift in the sense of being able to execute against callers' needs. And so by spending all this time in post-deployment and the constant tinkering and the constant iteration, we're better able to stay on top of that drift and address it and just find out really what's going on. We find we keep a better pulse on our client and on their end users.
That's really interesting. What is the idea of single serving approach to providing information? Is that a...
Yeah. So back in the day, when we had that complicated menu structure, press 1 for this, press 3 for that, it would be difficult for a caller to navigate his or her way to the appropriate selection that was going to take care of them. So often what happened was, they got over here to hear about eligibility. Well, they didn't ask about their benefits, but because they asked for eligibility, it's so hard to find benefits after they've already found eligibility. Let's start giving them extra stuff that they didn't ask for so that they don't now have to go and navigate towards it. We know it's kind of related, so we're just going to pony it up voluntarily. Well, that's great if the caller's actually interested in benefits information. But if they're not interested in benefits information, we've just spent a lot of their time trapped in IVR jail that they maybe weren't interested in. So what conversational allows us to do is you can say, hey, I'm interested in eligibility. Yeah, your policy started on January 1st and is set to expire on December 31st. How else can I help you? Can you give me my benefits information? Sure. Let me tell you all about your benefits information. So now single serving is I can give you only as much as you exactly asked for. I don't have to be Helpy the Wonder paperclip getting up in your face and trying to help you with things that you didn't ask about. I can just give you this little single serving. I can provide to you what you bid off and what you bid off only, and let you come back and bite off more if that's what you decide is right for you.
That's so interesting. Since I am the layperson here on the call, I'm noticing these things that I've been hearing recently and going, oh yeah, that was just delivered to me, like just in a call the other day. Tell me about how SMS and messaging are playing into the world of VUI today.
Yeah, that's been a really nice development too, because inevitably there are things that are just hard to communicate over the voice channel. There are some things, as we all know, pictures worth 1,000 words. And sometimes just being able to communicate something in text is easier to do. And so there are opportunities now for us to be able to say, you know what, that's really complicated. Can I just send you a link to that information, send it to your mobile device? I see you called in on a phone number ending in 1234. I can send this to you if this is your mobile device. So, oh, no, don't do that. That's not my mobile number. Great, what's your mobile number? I can send it to you. So it just gives us some other options when either information is too complex to try to share over the VUI channel, or if it's something that we think this is something that the caller may want to have persist beyond the scope of this phone call and have it to refer back to later. Really makes it nice to have that as an option.
Yep, I just had that happen the other day too. And then last on this subject is, what are the special things that the voice talent themselves can do to make the interaction more engaging? What are you finding there is most important?
So often you can write a prompt and it sounds perfect in your head. But then actually when you ask the voice talent to say it, you find it does not roll off the tongue. Like, it just doesn't work. And so honestly, having the voice talent be honest about whether something feels authentic maybe is a really nice thing that they can do. What we often do is coach the voice talent, because we're asking them to execute a vision, and often they don't have that same vision in their head that you do. So by participating in the recording sessions, you're able to give them some sort of on-the-fly guidance about, here's why we're asking for this. So just that extra little bit of context can often make a difference in terms of how they're able to deliver that prompt. But then it should be a two-way, right? It's like I'm giving them information, but they should also be giving me information about this just kind of feels stilted.
Clunky to say.
Yeah, clunky. What if we did it this way? So that two-way street, that dialogue between designer and voice talent can really be valuable.
So we've talked a little bit about what the voice talent can do. Maybe we can talk a little bit about the difference between employing a professional voice talent and working with somebody who's just works for the company as an internal employee, it's just recording a non-professional. Because we do, at least on our side, we run across that. People will say, well, we've got Joe in IT or Mary in telco who can do these recordings. So in your perspective, as a user interface designer, what's the difference between the two, and what are the advantages of using a professional voice talent?
The differences are night and day. I always have this sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach when I hear that Joe in IT is going to be our voice talent. To me, that's like, we're going to spend, $500,000 on a Rolls Royce, and we're going to go take it down to Joe's auto shop and put a coat of paint on it. You know what I mean? It's like, wait a minute, we're 98% of the way there. It's like painting your house, guys. It's the cheapest way to get an immediate facelift. And actually what we found is that if you do nothing else to an IVR other than just replace it with prompts that are recorded by in-house talent, air quotes, if you do nothing but replace those same exact prompts in an IVR with professional voice talent, we have seen that you can get an uplift of 2% containment just changing out prompts. Yeah.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Jim, stay doing what you're doing with Concentrix. Yeah. You're helping.
I hope so.
That's right.
And another trend that we've seen too is this idea of text to speech. And I'd be interested in your perspective, Leslie, on the differences between working with a professional voice talent versus text to speech, where it may or may not be appropriate. I mean, certainly there could be cases there as well, but would love to hear your perspective on that.
So with Agile, it's definitely beneficial to be using, the text-to-speech has really come a long way, and Amazon has this contact center in the cloud solution that's available, and part of the Amazon solutions include what's called Poly. Poly is synthetic speech, text-to-speech. It's got enough bells and whistles that you can do some things to control Poly, but Poly's not 100%. You can't control every little thing. So there's some frustration around that, but you're looking for, how do I speed things up? So where you have these things, maybe where there's a little less of a customer satisfaction focus and we're changing things all the time, Poly and synthetic text-to-speech is helpful. But here's the thing. I think that a lot of IVR voice bots are going to start using Poly and Poly-like voices, which means that if you want to differentiate yourselves from your competitors, if you don't want your IVR to sound like everybody else's IVR, then one of the ways to do that and to align your IVR touch points with your overall branding strategy, one of the ways that you do that is by using a professional voice talent.
That's fabulous. That's fabulous. I mean, just think of the range of, if you go through our roster and we've got 25, 26 U.S. English voice talents, they all sound different, and they're all oriented to a different customer persona in a different kind of application. So I see that point absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Let's talk a little bit about, as kind of a wrap up here, about the future. Okay. So what are you seeing, Leslie, or what are your predictions? You have a crystal ball. How do you see user interface design changing over the next few years?
So crystal ball, huh? One of the things that I think is really interesting is the new young talent that is coming up. I've just recently hired someone whose background is not only human-machine interface, but also AI. And so she is going to help us hone our skills around machine learning and what that can bring to the table. One of the things that we're trying to get a handle on is starting to draw relationships between what the caller states his call reason is and what things we do or say with them that increases or decreases their probability of containing. And then once we have this machine learning model that knows what those relationships are, we can start pulling some levers. So that's really exciting. I think we had talked about back in my day, I took psychology and French. There was no human-machine interaction class at Austin College in Sherman, Texas. So it's really exciting for me that young kids today have so many options available to them to explore this and come into the market with marketable skills in this space. So that's pretty cool. It's been a lot of fun bringing the new ones in and growing them up and kind of molding them into what we want to be. So that's been fun. Things that I'm nervous about, though, I mentioned that Amazon has a contact center in the cloud. It's called Amazon Connect, and we've just recently become an official, partner. I think one of the things that concerns me about Amazon Connect, which in a lot of ways, it's a really super great, easy way to create a contact center. They have made their tools really easy to use. So a business analyst or a software engineer fresh out of college could create a contact center infrastructure and make sure that an IVR is taking calls and it's routing calls to appropriate agents. But the thing that I worry about there is we've talked a lot about the things that go into what makes a really nice voice user interface. We've talked about the warmth in the voice talent's voice. We've talked about how word selection is so important. We talked about how smarty pants tend to have a hard time restraining themselves and having self-discipline and using words that are accessible to the average user. And kids who are fresh out of college, either as a software engineer or a business analyst, guess what they're trying to do? They're trying to impress their boss and their peers. And if they haven't been exposed to some of these ideas about how one makes a really great UI design, and they're tasked with creating an IVR, then all of a sudden we're back to the 90s where we had complicated menu trees, or maybe we have an NLU that doesn't work very well because, if they don't understand some really fundamental things about how to build against a natural language model, it can make for funky experiences that really don't show off the technology very well and doesn't ultimately serve the end user needs or the needs of the business.
The thing that's really amazing is when I listen back to what we've talked about, it seems that the goal is to make the interaction simpler, to make it more natural, to make it more conversational. In one sense, it's collapsing a lot of unneeded words and unneeded structures. Yet in order to make that happen, there's just this plethora of technology and thinking behind it that ultimately gets you where you need to go, which I think is absolutely fabulous. And
simple isn't easy, Jim.
I was going to say, finding simplicity on the far side of complexity takes a lot of experience to know how to do that. So it looks so much easier when you get a great result, but the complexity you had to go through to get to it is not always obvious.
Well, I think about it, Leslie Janet, I've seen her speak on a number of occasions. She's a fabulous public speaker. And I asked her, why is it that you're spending so much time on this speech? It's only, 3 minutes. You didn't spend that much time on your hour speech. And she said, well, it's harder. You have to really kind of think about all the things that go into it to really deliver it in a concise and impactful way. And there's a lot of parallelism there, I think.
As Mark Twain said, if I'd had more time, I would have made it shorter.
Right.
That's my job every day.
All
Let's
right,
end there on Mark Twain and the beauty, the artfulness, the incredible creativity and simplicity that VUI designers create every day in our experience.
Yes, and Leslie, I want to thank you. This has been a real worthwhile use of time. I've learned a lot in this discussion and looking forward to continuing to work with you. And Janet, any other thoughts?
No, thank you, Leslie. That was really great. Thank you I love to learn, so I just learned a whole bunch.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun for me as well.
All right. Take it easy, folks. See you next time.